Welcome to the Sheffield Sunday As Bill Season meeting. This is a main share meeting, and it's with great pleasure and much gratitude that we welcome Myers R. from the great state of Texas, who's come to share for about 40 minutes, after which we'll open up for general sharing, or if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you, Myers. It is wonderful to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andy. It's always a treat to see y'all. I always get a little caught off guard by how many of y'all I know and have met over the years, and it's always so. Some of y'all I've known long enough that I'm like this, just really close to, and it's just who would have ever thought that we would have good buddies all over the world, and it's pretty special. My name, if I haven't met you yet, my name is Myers Raymer. I'm a very grateful recovered alcoholic from Central Texas in the middle of nowhere. And it's a hoot to see you, especially with the time change stuff. Goodness, I just be so glad when they get rid of that. My new rap name is going to be Little Pig because I always ask for I asked for more. They said, would you pick a thing from As Bill Sees It? And I said, can I pick two? And I could still see Young rolling his eyes going, yes, Myers, you pig, you go ahead, you can do that. And so the reason I did that is because both of these writings paint a picture of what AA look like as Bill and the first 100 codified and put all this stuff together. It's a kind of in your grill. Hey, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And I get a bit frustrated because I over the years, we've kind of moved away from a lot of that, and things have just gotten kind of goofy. There used to be an old saying in AA that we teach what we're taught. And so if you're going to a bunch of meetings and all you know is just going to a bunch of meetings, that's what you're going to teach when it comes time to sponsor. There's nothing wrong with meetings. I'm never ragging on that. However, I will say this, as a big book guy, for a bunch of years now, the value of knowing and understanding what the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous intended for us to get out of this book paints a completely different picture. And so I just want to talk about that just a little bit. It's not going to be a spankathon, but I want you to kind of compare where you are today compared to maybe the picture that Bill and those guys painted. There used to be this guy that was a guy. His name was Horse Jim in the original group that I was a member of when I got sober in '88. And Horse Jim would always introduce himself like this. He'd always go, my name's Jim, and I'm sober today. And we just went on. I mean, and for some of you, you're going to go, okay, that's okay. But what picture is that talking about? He's telling us every day that he's sober today, and there's nothing wrong with being sober every day. But again, the contrast between what we just read, our chief responsibility to the newcomer is an adequate presentation of the program. But I happen to be involved in a group full of the loveliest people I'd ever met, just sweethearts. But all we did, 32 meetings a week, and all we did was just talk about our stories. We never talked about the big book. We never studied the big book. We never really did any of that stuff. And so it's a little surprise that by the time I got 3 or 4 years in, things got pretty goofy. And by the time I got, 7 years in, I was a suicidal mess. Because I'm just living on, can I go to a meeting today? This kind of thing. And so things would get kind of goofy. I want to tell you a quick story to set this up a little bit. In Texas, we're pretty warm most of the time, and so we get a lot of people from upstate in the United States that come down to Texas and live during the winter. And these winter Texans are delightful. I was working some part-time stuff down on the island, down on South Padre Island, right next to Mexico. And in the summer, or in the winter, we would fill up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in these meetings from up north. And there was a guy named David that used to always come in, and I used to bring the patients from this treatment place that I was working over to listen to this stuff. And we had a Saturday night candlelight meeting. It was kind of cool. They liked getting out, and I liked being there too. And so, but this guy named David, he started sharing. He's always the last guy to share, and he started talking about how his dog had gotten loose on the beach, and the cops were called, and people were mad. But you're supposed to put a leash on the little rascals down there on the beach. And anyway, he spent 9 or 10 minutes just talking about the drama of dealing with the police down on the beach with his dog. And I'm just kind of, it's a candlelight meeting and the lights are down really low and we have these candles in front of us. And the next day, the guys in the meeting said, Myers, we could see steam coming out of your ears. And I just, and so at the end of his tirade, he said, and so for some of you big book guys in here, I want to just tell you that this book is about staying sober one day at a time. It has nothing to do with how we live our life. Now, that's what he said. And I kind of went, what did I just hear? And so I was real kind. I left. I didn't punch him in the whats or anything. I just I just went on about my business. And so the next day we talked about it in Big Book some. And so here's the point. How many of y'all have ever been in a situation where you had family members or people that you truly loved that ended up in the program, and they all of a sudden ended up in the same meetings that we were going to like that? My oldest daughter's been sober for a good bit now. But I remember when she first started coming, I became hypersensitive to what people were saying in meetings. The question becomes, did David, the guy, did he need a place to share that story? Absolutely. I don't regret the fact. I mean, yeah, they call those sponsors or pals in AA or something like that. But to take up valuable recovery time talking about something that had nothing to do with recovery, no steps, no nothing. It just, it's just, Bill was clear as he could be in those two things that we just read, that our primary responsibility is to teach what we can about the steps and about what this process is about. And so I want to connect up some dots real quick before I go on like that. Some of y'all know my twin brother, the evil twin, and Chris sobered up 2 months before I did, but he had been trying for 7 years to get sober. And when he finally got sober, it was sort of an amazing deal. And 2 months later, he took me to my first AA meeting and in Dallas, and it was a game changer. The deal is that we're going to a whole bunch of meetings, but we're not studying anything. Literally, y'all, I'm almost 7 years sober, and I'm living in the other end of the house from my family because they don't know who's coming home. I'm spending money I don't have. I'm doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and I can't understand why. I don't. Years later, somebody would say, Myers, didn't you recognize restless, irritable, and discontent? And I went, nah, I never even heard of that. Didn't even know what it was like that. The only reason I tell that part of that story is I want you to understand you can be sober and still be real unhappy. But when you read the basic text, when you look at what they wrote, they paint this miraculous picture of a life transformed into something that I never dreamed that it could be. And that's pretty special. And so, Chris introduced me to a guy named Cliff Bishop, and who was an old, crusty guy in Dallas who had started a book study called Primary Purpose Group, and his sponsor was Joe McQuaney, Joe McHugh, so you kind of Joe and Charlie, and so you kind of know where all of this is going like this. I mean, I don't know even who the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous are, and I'm 2 weeks shy of 7 years sober, sitting in those meetings, so unhappy that I don't know whether I'll live from day to day to day. I'm a suicidal mess that can't work. I can't function. My family's terrified of me. I don't know what to do. I'm sober today. Y'all understand the connection here? That I'm leaning into this one thing over and over and over again, and there's no real, I'm as bad a shape as I could possibly be. Clifford, we talked for a few minutes, and then he said, Myers, will you be willing to come to this group for a month or two until we get you back on track, and then you can go back to your other meeting, or you could stay with us. And I ended up staying with Clifford and them, and it was the greatest decision that I'd ever made, next to getting married to my wife and having some little girls. I can't even begin to describe. It was like another world kind of a situation. All of a sudden, we're talking about things in the big book that I don't understand, and yet there is, for the first time, hope that maybe something's going to be different, that maybe that restless, irritable, and discontent thing in my gut is going to go away, and I'm going to be able to function again. The depression begins to leave. The goofy, suicidal stuff begins to go away, and I got better. I'm still pushing back like a crazy man. I'm still, it's crazy. You can defend some of the weirdest stuff in the universe. I don't know why some of us are like that, but I still want to share my quote unquote experience, strength, and hope, and with all my weird stories that don't mean anything. And Clifford keeps looking at me over his glasses, going, homeboy, stop. We don't need to hear that stuff. And I go, oh, okay. Well, anyway, I finally connected up some dots and got to where things got a lot better. Some of you, real quick, I want to take a fast 90-degree turn and talk about something that's a little different like that, and then I'll get back on track, I swear. Any of y'all ever hear of the Hughes Act? The Hughes Act was a piece of litigation that was done in the United States in 1971, and what it was a political thing, a congressional deal that was set up to put the teeth in the treatment industry, so that before that there wasn't much of anything that looked like treatment. They had asylums. The book talks about them, these asylums where people were just piled up in stacks and left to die. They were pretty horrible places. And the treatment industry moved in, and of course money was involved, and so that made things a little weird too. But the big picture was that there were literally overnight, there were thousands and thousands of businesses that opened up, treatment places that opened up, and there were tens of thousands of drunks that got help. The problem is that at that exact same moment, people were talking about the therapy and about all this other kind of stuff, and we sort of gently moved the big book to one side. And so it took us 36 years to get the first million members of Alcoholics Anonymous. 36 years. After the Hughes Act, in the next 5 years, we had the next million. Do y'all see what I'm saying? It was just amazing how many people all of a sudden came to the fellowship, which was exciting. It was a cool thing. But it created some problems in terms of the success rates of people that were getting sober, because we weren't talking about the big book much anymore. We were talking about, hey, who's got the problem today? Let's talk about your mother-in-law that you can't stand and you want to whatever. I mean, all of a sudden things just took a turn, and that wasn't everywhere. You guys may have been fortunate enough to be in meetings where people stayed on track. Unfortunately, this scrawny Texan wasn't. I was talking about every goofy thing in the universe like that. So once I got hooked up with Cliff, let me pull it back. Once I got hooked up with Clifford and Joe McQuaney, they're hyper energetic. about trying to get me back on path and to get me doing what the things that I'm supposed to do. And I'm forever grateful on that. There are a couple of things that they wanted me to do that I'm not going to do. Like, I'm going to go to a meeting, and yes, I'm going to study that book I don't understand, but I'm not going to sponsor people because I'm going to suck. And if you suck at something, you shouldn't do it. And so that was my deal. I'm going to be a horrible sponsor, so I'm just not going to do it. And there was this idea of approaching others that the big book talks about over and over and over. It's one of the most reoccurring themes in the big book, but nobody ever talks about it. In the early days of AA, there weren't meetings to go to. I mean, there were a handful of them if you were lucky to be in certain areas, but in other areas that they weren't. And so the idea of approaching other alcoholics was something that was the deal. And yet I'm thinking, no, I'll just wait. And when they show up at a meeting, then I can maybe help them. Y'all ever understand statistically how many people don't show up? We assume that that tens of thousands of people coming out of treatment, that they're all going to end up in AA. And statistically, that's not the case. The vast majority don't end up in AA. They go home, start watching reruns of Storage Wars on TV, start getting a new girlfriend, a brand new pickup. It's Texas, y'all. You got to have one of them. And they just all of a sudden they just drift aside. You see, and we get sick again. A lot of y'all have been around for a long time. I've known you for a long time, and you've been sober for a bunch of years, and you know what it's like to watch a lot of these people get sick and slide sideways and just kind of drift off into the wherever, and eventually they get sick enough that they get drunk again, and it's heartbreaking to see. This was the stuff that Clifford and Joe McQuaney kept trying to teach me about this stuff, is that our job, we just read them and as Bill sees it, my job was to carry a clear message of hope and about what recovery was. And this was a game changer. It may be the single most pivotal moment in my whole recovery was when Clifford asked me if I'd ever listened to some of these old talks that were out there, and I just I hadn't. And the one of these talks that I listened to, this guy was talking about the difference between sobriety and recovery. And it literally went in one ear and out the other ear. I never even considered it like that. And then later I listened to it again and I went, holy cow. And then as we studied the text, look at how many times the word recovered is used in the big book. We recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. And they just, our whole book was written about the idea of having a transformational experience that we would call recovery. It wasn't about just being sober one day at a time. And this is the reason why this stuff got to be real important, because I began to realize over a short period of time that my job with these new people that I was talking to was maybe to explain and maybe to paint a picture of what we were moving towards. Y'all understand that. I think some of you certainly do understand it. That if all we're trying to sell is can we be sober one day at a time, we're missing the whole deal. Because let me tell you, I don't mind being direct with people about this kind of stuff. If being sober one day at a time is all you're after, then this idea is going to be a burden. You're going to carry this thing and it's going to get heavier and heavier until pretty soon you're going to not want to go to a meeting. You're not going to want to do this. You're not going to, and some of y'all have lived in that nightmare. You've moved sideways enough that you see that. And most of you, obviously have been able to work your way back. This sidestepping stuff and getting sick again is a natural part of our deal. I've never ever met anybody in AA that didn't have seasons where they were 100% on point. And then over a period of time, we stopped doing the things that we're supposed to be doing. And then all of a sudden we just slide into a place, we just drift, and all of a sudden we're uncomfortable in our own skin. Things we're just not digging this stuff, you see. And this is the reason why I think it's so important to to look at the bigger picture sometimes of it, not so much about how long have we been sober. Let's also look at, can we recognize, if we read in the big book from the ABCs over to the third step prayer, where you got 2.5 pages where Bill Wilson stops talking about alcoholism completely, doesn't even mention it, but he does mention that perhaps selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our problem. And we get introduced to this idea that maybe we are that stage character, that we are the actor that's trying to run the show. It's really uncomfortable sometimes to look at that stuff. It was another one of those really hard things. I'm a nice guy, and I want people to know I'm a nice guy, and it never even occurred to me that I could be selfish. You see? I'm gonna take one more zag. I promise you I'll zig back in a minute and I'll get it back on track like that. But let me, go back when you don't have anything else to do. Like, I know, I feel like I got out of the meth lab this morning. I'm just bouncing around like, I'm sorry. I'll do better. I promise. Go read from the ABCs over to the third step prayer, those 2.5 pages, and then read it again. And then later read it again, and then see if you can relate to it. See if you can see the stage character deal in there like that. We were talking about it one night, and this guy said, "You know how you could really tell if you're a stage character?" And I said, "I'm open." And he said, "Ask your wife." And I went, "Oh, well." Maybe not. And so he said, "No, really, give it a try." And so I asked Londa, and some of y'all know my wife, and she's a sweetheart. And I said, "Hey, Londa, am I the stage character that they're talking about here?" And she said, "Do we have to have this conversation now?" And I went, No. As a matter of fact, we don't ever have to talk about it." And she goes, "Okay." And a couple of days later, she walked up and she said, "All right, I'm ready to have that conversation." And it was to have somebody that loves you enough to tell you that you're a controlling, manipulating knucklehead, I think this is important. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see that you're selfish, you can't unsee it, and which is brilliant that Bill Wilson put it where he did right before the inventory, because now they're going to rub your nose in it in the inventory, and you're going to see it, and then you're going to be given the necessary tools to identify it and then get rid of it in step 6 and 7, which is pure magic. Another thing on that deal, go back and read the promises. Go read those promises. Sometimes I got to find my big ebook. Go back and read the promises sometime, and just pick. They're everywhere. The 9-step promises, 10-step promises, 5th-step promises. These are all big collections of this deal. I'm going to read a little piece on the 5th-step promises on page 75 in the English version of the U.S. version of this stuff. And I'm going to skip down a little bit. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. Now, we may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we're on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Dang. Stop and think about that, y'all. That paints a picture that's so amazing, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Listen, these promises in the book, they've either manifested in your life or they haven't. Or there's always the possibility that Bill Wilson was just full of crap and he was just writing stuff to sell a book. But once they start manifesting, you'll go, Bill knew exactly what he was talking about. Those folks had it nailed like that. And I don't care whether you've been sober for 2 weeks or 20 years or 200 years. I don't care. You will find yourself, depending on how long you've been sober or where you've been or who's teaching you, that sometimes we don't manifest these things. And so I think it's once I can see the truth, I can't unsee it. And once I see it, I'm going to look for the solution. And the solution was I quit fighting Cliff Bishop and Joe McQuaney. I quit fighting them. I quit pushing back every time they suggested something like this. Look at how many times in the big book work and self-sacrifice for others is mentioned. It's one of the most reoccurring themes over and over and over. Work and self-sacrifice, work and self-sacrifice. And remember, when they wrote this, they were talking, in those days, they were talking about still approaching people. They weren't talking about just going to a meeting. Well, I go to a meeting, that's my work and self-sacrifice. You can write it that way if you want to, but that's not what Bill Wilson was talking about when they wrote it. Work and self-sacrifice means you take a call at 10 o'clock at night when you don't want to. It means you approach some skanky looking guy sitting in a meeting that's struggling and looking at the floor. You approach him and have a conversation like that. Y'all, this is what we're all after. Joe McQuaney said one time, he said, our job is to feed, not be fed. And I spent 7 years seeing what I could take out of every meeting that I went to. I'm just taking it. If somebody said something like this and I'm gonna remember it so I can copy it and repeat it later, is crazy. It never even occurred to me, that there were people that I could approach in those meetings, people that I could help. We see it all the time. In the end, the big picture is how much time, this is like Dr. Bob used to talk about this all the time. How much time are you spending with God and how much time are you spending with God's kids? It's simple. We talk about it all the time. I mean, every one of us in here hears that all the time like that. But I think it's important to look at it and ask ourselves the question, how much time am I spending with God? There was a kid in a meeting one night that he used to call God Big Homie. He said, this morning when I was talking to Big Homie, blah, blah, and he went on with the thing. And then he said, and funny, my sponsor said one time, he asked me this question and y'all might think it's funny. And I'm sitting there waiting for him to finally get to the point. And he asked me if God was my girlfriend, would she be happy with how much time I'm spending with her? And I remember looking at it like this and going, what did he just say? And then all of a sudden I started laughing and I realized, you know what? That's really some wisdom in that. How much time am I spending with God? Am I praying as I back my truck out of the driveway in the morning like that? Is that the time with God? Or am I actually spending quiet time? This isn't about fancy prayers. This isn't about all this other stuff. This is about quiet time, about just being still in the presence of our Creator. And it's a game changer, truly. And I got to tell you, 38 years into this deal, it still doesn't make any sense to me. I still can't connect it up intellectually. Wait a minute. If I'll just shut up, get out of the way, and sit still with God in the morning, will it make any difference? And yeah, it does. And the next piece of this was how much time are you spending with God's kids? This idea of being able to approach those who are struggling, it is truly an amazing deal. And I won't get into it. The statistical stuff of people coming to AA and then leaving. It's still the best game ever for getting people sober. I've never found anything that's even close to as effective as this 12-step program. However, I'm often caught off guard by how many people come, pick up a desire chip, and then leave, and thousands, and we don't know. The question that always beats up my old head is Myers, why did they leave? What is it they didn't hear that they should have heard? And this is a big, big deal. I think we need to be a little bit more willing to look at our big picture of what we're carrying and how we're carrying it and see what we can do. I've got just a few more minutes, and I just want to let me tell you real quick. I want to tell you a real quick story. Not all AA groups are the same. They're all full of the nicest people in the world. I've never found a group that wasn't full of sweethearts. But there's a culture, and some of y'all have noticed this. There's a culture in some groups. When you walk into some meetings, you see big books and you see people that are doing step work with people, and I mean, that's the way it looks. There are other times when you walk in and it's just about visiting with people and this sort of thing. I had been asked to do a talk at a big fancy group in Dallas. I'm not going to say who they were, but if you call me and pay me $5, I'll tell you what that group's name was. But they were something special, really big, and I'd never been to the group, but it was pouring down rain, and I remember walking into this group, and there's a bunch of people sitting out front, and I ran across the parking lot in my suit, and they wanted me to do an anniversary talk, and I walked across, and there are 8 or 9 people sitting on the front porch of this meeting hall, and I said, "Hey, is this the such and such group?" And this guy said, "Yep." And I went, "Oh, okay." So I'm just shaking the water off my coat, and I'm just kind of just like looking around, and nobody's saying anything, and everybody's just visiting, and not with me. I'm just standing there. And so finally, after a couple of minutes, I thought, this is kind of uncomfortable. I think I'll go inside. Well, I turn around and it's a big wall of glass, and I can't see how to get inside the building. And so finally, I said, "Hey, y'all, how do you get in the meeting hall?" And this guy, the same guy that had helped, had been no help at all before, pointed over his shoulder like this. And I remember looking, and sure enough, on one of these pieces of glass, there was a little place to put your hand and slide the glass door over. And I went, "Oh, okay. I sure appreciate that." And nobody said a word. And they're all dressed in cutoffs and muscle shirts, and I've got a suit on, and there wasn't one person on that front porch that said one word to me when I got there. So I walk inside, and nobody says anything to me in there, and pretty soon some of my homies from my home group showed up, and then we got to talking, and some other people finally came over, and we got through that meeting. It was the night that I codified the phrase spankathon, because I felt like, damn. Anyway, so hold that thought. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, I had asked to do an anniversary talk at the Saginaw group in Fort Worth. I'm going to tell you who they are. And I pulled into their parking lot, and I can see 15 or 20 people in the butt hut out behind this place, all smoking cigarettes and stuff and vaping. I just pulled in, and then I hopped out of my pickup, and I'm looking in the mirror in the side window to make sure my tie is straight. And all of a sudden I feel somebody poke me in the side. I jumped and looked over, and all 20 of those people were standing in the parking lot, and they had walked out. And they all put their big arms around me like this and gave me big old hugs like this, and just kind of almost carried me inside that area. And we stood outside and talked for a second or like that. And we were laughing a bunch and stuff like that. And then this lady said, "Hey, come with me. I want to introduce you to everybody inside." And so we walk inside. She introduces me to literally everybody inside. It's like, this is the coolest thing in the whole wide world. And we had one fine meeting. We truly did. So the question that always comes up in my old mind when I'm thinking about this story is, if your daughter, who was a hot mess that was probably going to die on the street, if she was sober for a day or two and she wanted some help, what meeting would you want her to be in? The big fancy schmancy group, or the Saginaw group where people understood why they were there and what it is that they were doing? Guys, I got to tell you like that. We had the finest meeting that night over at that place, and it was just a real fun deal. And I just have always been grateful that there are people that are in meetings that are willing to understand the real reason that we're here. Let me make a couple of fast suggestions and I'll quit. Next time you're in a meeting, and Instead of finding your homies to talk to, instead of finding everybody to just pal with like that, there's plenty of time to do that later. Do yourself and everybody a favor. Walk inside and look around and pay attention to who's reading a big book, who's looking at the floor, who's standing over in a corner by themselves, come on, y'all. Every one of you in here remember what it was like to feel uncomfortable and not be connected to anybody in these rooms. And it's just insane how often these people are ignored. I used to hear old timers all the time, and now that I'm one, I still hear it. People going, "Well, if he leaves, the booze will drive him back in." And I'm going, statistically, I can't make that line up. What I'm seeing these days is that we'll probably end up burying them. We got this sweet moment where somebody is hurting enough, they're sitting there uncomfortable, and they're willing to move towards something, anything that might affect change in their lives. And this is the reason why my deal is, and with everybody that I sponsor in these meetings like this, tell your homies to go piss off. Tell them to go away. You're busy doing the things that you need to be doing, which is to approach the people in that room that are struggling and hurting. Go over and introduce yourself. Where are you from? Let's visit. Let's talk about this kind of stuff. And it's an amazing difference that all of a sudden you have some people that feel connected, that feel like we really care about the fact that they're there. There is a social quality to everything that we do in AA. I totally dig that. I got nothing, there's nothing wrong with that. I just say at some point in time, we need to move past the fellowship part and get into the nuts and bolts. When you look back on page 17 in the big book and you pay attention to they talk about the common peril, our story. If I met Brian Judson for the very first time, I got to tell him a little story, our common peril. And he's going to tell me about that night with all those weird animals that he was out. We won't go there, but we're going to talk back and forth and connect up from that standpoint. But as soon as that's established, as soon as he knows that I understand how cray-cray things can get in booze and dope land, then my job is to next do the next thing that it says right below that. And we talk about the common solution. That's what we need to tell, which means that we need to understand what the program is. We need to understand what alcoholism is so that we can explain that to him. This is the reason why the big book stuff is paramount. I'm not saying you got to change meetings and go just go to book studies. I'm not trying to turn you into a guy with a big book slapping people upside the head. I want you to understand that if you could go to your regular meetings, but also go to a book study, if you can't find one, maybe that's God's word that maybe what you need to do is start one. There's nothing you can do in your life that will affect change more than helping people understand what alcoholism is and what the solution is so that we can move them from that point of misery and hopelessness to hope, and then from hope to holy cow, that solution around this creator is life-changing in every area of my life. Guys, listen, I'm delighted that I'm sober. I am. I'm delighted. But I'm a lot more these days affected by the fact that a crusty old bastard from Central Texas could affect change in the lives of other people who might miss it just going to a whole bunch of meetings. I want to be a carrier of a message that Bill Wilson was talking about in those as Bill sees it articles. I want to be that guy. I want to look back and realize that I could affect change and that I could somehow be there to do that. It's a game changer for how you look at not only your recovery but how you look at your whole life. As you get to be old like me, looking back. I don't want to look back and go, hey, I've been sober for 38 years or 40 or 60. Great. In the words of Mickey Bush, so's the cat. It's not about the sobriety part like that. It's not about that. It's about in my life, could I change the path of people in a positive way? And that's worth every effort that we could put into it for sure. All right. Listen, Lil Pig out. I appreciate you guys being here. Thanks.